Good morning, my dear students. We are meeting after so long, and amidst this pandemic, we are here to begin the online classes from St. Xavier's. So, now before we go to the lecture of this academic year, I would like to brief out what the social science of Standard 10 has. You all know that social science usually is divided only into three: history, civics, and geography. Very familiar with these three subjects which are included in social science. Now we have another subject which is included in social science, and that is economics. So in all, for this academic year, your social science is divided into 4. So to begin with this academic year's session, I would like to begin with lesson 1 of geography, which is lesson 8 in your textbook. The title is Natural Resources. So let's begin with lecture 1 of lesson 8. So before we go through any subject, we ought to know that every subject has its own objectives. And according to the objectives, we know that the objectives have a great value in our life. So let's go with the first point of this chapter: man versus nature's relationship. Man is not an independent creature. Nature's relationship is also a must. So in all, we can say man is interdependent on nature. We go to the next point, that is nature's gift. Nature is a gift of God, productive, unproductive. When we talk about productive and unproductive and its gift, it is in our hands to make it productive or unproductive. Next comes to the limited use of resources, which according to me, and in this point, the term used here is judicious. Judicious use means limited use. I'll read out the point to you. Judicious use with utility value. When resources have no value, it cannot be put to use. And when we say it has some utility value, it has to be extracted. It has to be made use by man. And hence, to preserve or to conserve this, we are going to the last point, which is talking about the resources to be preserved or conserved. When we talk about these two words, preserved and conserved, we will discuss about this in the other points or in the other slides. So now let me introduce to the chapter. Resources are of many types. We can also talk about human resource and various other resources. But when we talk about the relationship of geography, we are talking about the natural resources. So to begin with, let us come to know what are resources. They are stock of elements of nature. So in short, if I should say, stock of elements of nature which can be utilized by man through his specific knowledge and expertise. We can also say that anything which is used to fulfill human needs becomes a resource. In short, resources are made of 3 interactions: nature, man, and culture. Now, we cannot have the resources without being used. So, in order to put the resources to use, we have divided the resources into 3. They are food resource, raw material, and energy resource. When we talk about the resources which come out from food, we can talk about honeybee, honey which is extracted, which is a form of food. We can also talk about fish and aquatic animals, which is used as food. Next we go to the raw materials. When we talk about the raw materials, we can also talk about raw materials like agricultural products, which is a form of raw material. We can also talk about the forest products, from which we get wood and out of which we make many other items. Next we go to the energy resource. The resources of energy deals with solar insolation. In short, we know it as solar energy. We have many other examples. For example, mineral ores, and then which is being converted. So that also depends on the energy resource. Now when we go to the next, that is types of resources, we can say that they are classified into 3 on the basis of ownership, on the basis of re-availability and on the basis of distribution center. So now let's go through table 1 to understand the ownership of resources on the basis of with the examples. Individual resource. It is owned by an individual or a family. For example, land and building. We can talk about the individual resource as a resource which is used only by a person. When we go to the next resource, we talk about national resource. The very word national says it is specifically within the boundary of a country or a region. It is purely having an international relationship. Next we go to the global resource. When we talk about the global resources, the very word global says it's worldwide. When we talk about the worldwide resources, we talk about them being interdependent. No country is independent of its own resources. Every country depends on each other. For example, resources of a common ownership of all nations of the world as stated in the example in your textbook. Now let's go to table 2. According to the distribution area, they are divided into 4: universal resources, generally available resources, rare resources, and solitary resources. When we just touch the first resource, that is universal resource, in case of distribution area, we can talk about the gases in the atmosphere, and we all know the gases in the atmosphere are useful, and it's a universal resource. There is no restriction in it, and nobody can restrict because it's related to nature. Next we talk about the available resources, which are general, which are common, and the resources which are general, and the word says common, are easily available. The third one is a rare resource, which is available in limited places. The last we come to solitary resources, which are minerals available at 1 or 2 places in the world. Now we have other methods of resource classification. When we come to know from this flow chart, we can go through which can be replaced and which cannot be replaced, and the term given to them is renewable and non-renewable. When we talk about the renewable resources, they are also mentioned as resources which are inexhaustible, and when we talk about the non-renewable resources, they are exhaustible. So there are other words, inexhaustible and non-exhaustible. So let's talk about the examples of renewable resources: water, sun, air, wind, and wood. We can also go simultaneously to the examples of non-renewable resources: natural gas, coal, and oil. Now, if we have to go much in detail, we can also have about 2 more words which are related to renewable and non-renewable, which means replenishable and non-replenishable. And renewable resource is otherwise known as non-replenishable, and these are replenishable. Now let's go through a video to understand the topic in detail.
Natural resources are of 2 kinds: renewable and non-renewable resources. Renewable resources are those that have the ability to renew themselves, provided they are not extinguished altogether. Examples for renewable resources include sunlight, wind, water, soil, forests, and livestock. Non-renewable resources are those that cannot be renewed or regenerated after they are used up completely. Thus, they have to be used economically and wisely. Examples include coal, fossil fuels, petroleum, and crude oil. Natural resources are of two kinds: renewable and non-renewable resources. Renewable resources are those that have the ability to renew themselves, provided they are not extinguished altogether. Examples for renewable resources include sunlight, wind, water, soil, forests, and livestock. Non-renewable resources are those that cannot be renewed or regenerated after they are used up completely. Thus, they have to be used economically and wisely. Examples include coal, fossil fuels, petroleum, and crude oil. Natural resources are of two kinds: renewable and non-renewable resources. Renewable resources are those that have the ability to renew themselves, provided they are not extinguished altogether. Examples for renewable resources include sunlight, wind, water, soil, forests, and livestock. Non-renewable resources are those that cannot be renewed or regenerated after they are used up completely. Thus, they have to be used economically and wisely. Examples include coal, fossil fuels, petroleum, and crude oil.
Now we'll proceed with conservation of resources. We all know planning is a must in order to preserve and conserve our resources. Now, as Gandhi said, each earth provides enough to satisfy every man's needs, but not every man's greed. Conservation is a state of harmony between men and land. So now let's proceed with the planning and conservation. In order to execute conservation of resources, we ought to plan. Planning is a must. So before we go in detail, let us try to distinguish between conservation and preservation. The concept of preservation is a short-term process referring to the present, and the concept of conservation refers to a long-term process. In short, it can be said, stocking for our future generations. In order to conserve resources for the forthcoming generations, we need to follow the following steps. First of all, we have to gather information about the availability of utilized resources, unutilized resources, and must have the concept of judicious use of resources, which is mandatory according to law. Non-renewable resources must be exploited scientifically. One must find alternate option through technical development. Last, we also need to have necessary laws which should be strictly enforced. Thank you.